Hi, yeah, I'm here to check in. My last name is Hausman. That's spelled Haussman.
I'm sorry, sir. I can't seem to find your reservation.
Oh, can you check again? It happens all the time. Sometimes people spell it with one S, two N's, but most of the time they spell it Hotelnerd. That's Hotelnerd.
Oh, yeah, that was it. Found it right here under Hotel Nerd.
Thanks.
Do you live, eat, and sleep the hotel industry? Looking to brush up on your game? You've come to the right place. Welcome to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman.
Hey everybody, your friendly neighborhood Glenn here, and I am excited and delighted once again to have you with me each and every week here on the No Vacancy Show. For all you new listeners out there, thanks so much for joining the party. We're having a great time educating, empowering, and entertaining all of you folks out there. And for all of you folks that have been listening for a long time, you know that was a load of lies. I'm not really doing anything to help you guys do anything out there except use this as a forum for bad dad jokes, I think. Anyway, everything's right, so just hold tight. Or really is it? Maybe I should be saying your trip is short because, man, this Chinese virus thing, coronavirus, is starting to get a little scary, starting to get a little out of control, and I don't know what to think about it. Honestly, I've always been on the side of, nah, don't you worry about it. No big deal. We got nothing to worry about. I remember back in the day, writing articles with that sentiment on that SARS thing, on that bird flu thing, all of the weird exotic diseases that come out of Asia. And of course, we got the classic Ebola virus that came out of Africa. I remember growing up thinking that was going to be the end of the world. And sometime, was it 6-7 years ago, when it started to be a pesky problem again, they actually were able to control that. So that was pretty good. Now, this one, though, feels different to me, right? It just feels a little bit more dangerous. It feels a little bit more scary, and I really don't know at this point how to process it. Is it more of the same coming at us in a different media package? Or is it something more serious that we should be focusing and paying attention on in a very serious way? The reason why I say I'm confused about all of this is because we just don't know what the deal is. The media landscape has changed, and you look at what's going on in the American political scene, and you think about the craziness and the divisiveness and the lack of adherence to rigorous understanding of facts and truth. And then you start to see that maybe everything we're hearing may not be honest. And I think there's this whole undercurrent in our society of not really believing what we're hearing. And I, of course, am one that thinks being skeptical about stuff is always a good idea because, you know, out there, I'm a big believer in that critical thinking. And in the vein of the typical stuff that we talk about here on No Vacancy, I always try to look at things a little bit differently, right? I hear what the CEOs are saying. I hear what the executives are saying in all the different facets of the industry, and I don't take people at face value for it, right? I draw my own conclusions based on all of those facts that I've assembled and put them through that test of, does this smell right? Right? And a lot of times I don't think that people really look at it. In fact, back in the day, I used to do a speech, and the title of it was Rethinking Conventional Thinking. The whole notion of there is everything that we've come to learn about the hotel industry may very well not be true, and maybe it's time to look at evidence and things that seem plainly obvious, flip them on their head and look at them in a totally different way in order to find what the real truth is as opposed to what that perceived truth is. And that's kind of the issue that I'm struggling here with right now with this Chinese virus. And what does it really mean? And how is it going to affect us sitting here listening to this show, right? If I was an owner of a hotel, I may not yet be concerned about it, but I'm starting to really think about it because stuff's getting really cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? All the borders really have been closed. We're not allowing any Chinese flights here into the United States. Other countries are starting to do exactly the same type of thing or have a really long holding period before they'll let those folks onto their country's property, blah, blah, blah. The scariest thing to me was they're talking a 2-week closure now that's happened in Macau at all of the casinos. That's pretty serious stuff right there. If they're closing the casinos for 2 whole weeks, think about all of that money. I just saw a piece just before I turned on the microphone that Wynn is losing more than $2 million per day from the closure. And it looks like Shanghai Disneyland is now closed for the time being. It could be closed up to 2 months, and they're talking potentially $175 million loss from that, and another $40 million loss from their Hong Kong Disney, which is also facing closure right now. So it's getting pretty scary, and I really wonder what all of you folks out there are thinking about this issue out there. Drop me a line. Let's communicate. Let's start something up on social media, and I'm wondering if I should even try to put together a LinkedIn Live event to discuss this issue with you folks. Maybe we'll do that sometime next week. I don't know. We shall figure it out. All right. So anyway, I want you guys, while we're all still alive over here, reshape your expectations of what an FF&E distribution partner for hospitality should be, right? You know I'm talking about Alamo Hospitality. Why? Because these guys are going to save you money. Plus, they also happen to be all really nice, the nicest group of men and women I have come in contact with in a long time. Now, it's not to say that all of you guys out there aren't freaking awesome too. I am blessed to be able to surround myself with so many incredible, positive, fantastic people. But these folks over at Alamo Corporation really just have a way with them, and they're going to help you do your job while saving you money. That's because they carry industry-leading brands, the latest in hospitality trends, and distinctive new-to-market brands that you need to think about, right? They got those Samsung products. They've got voice-activated products from Cirque Plus that not only help increase customer satisfaction, but believe it or not, help you guys save money by focusing on things such as, energy, lessening your energy dependence in the room. That's a really bad way of saying energy savings over there. Of course, you got Nonstop with their great wireless chargers over there. You've got Magic Chef. You've got all sorts of other products, guest laundry type of services, all the things that you need, including outdoor furniture, which was added about a year ago with their Cape Soleil line, and it is absolutely gorgeous stuff. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? In our first segment, we got Stuart Butler of Fuel, and we're going to be talking about something probably scarier to you than any cuckoo, crazy for cuckoo, cocoa puff, Chinese viruses out there. We're, of course, talking about Google and how they are coming into the hospitality universe finally after many years of threats, and what that really means to you and your businesses and how to better leverage it. This is going to be a great conversation. Well, all right. I'll be honest with you. I know it was a great conversation. I already had the conversation, and it was great. So be sure to tune in for that. And then, all right. So then in the second half of the show, we're doing something a little bit differently today. I'm still, nursing the body bruises I got during Alice last week, and we're a little short on content. So I don't have a brand new interview, but I got a really cool one for you today. Back from 2018 that I think is still timely today, and that is with professional comedian Dan Cummins. And what's cool about this is we talk about the hotel experience from the guest point of view. And being that he's a professional comedian, we have lots of laughs too. I think you're going to really love this show. Man, I'm excited to have you listen to this next Google segment. You're totally going to learn a lot. Hang out with Stuart Butler at Fuel. This guy sure as heck knows what he's talking about. And then listen to our interview with Dan Cummins right after our great advertisement from our super fantastic sponsors, Red Roof. All right, I want to thank you guys all for listening. Please share this show with friends. Please like us on Facebook. Please follow us on LinkedIn under No Vacancy. You know all of that stuff here. Don't make me beg. Don't make me plead. Don't make me come to your house and force you to hit the subscribe button. That is not going to end well for any of us, right? Particularly me. You don't need to see me embarrass myself. I'm already embarrassing myself plenty here right now on this microphone. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Remember this. You've got one life. Blaze on, and we'll see you next time. All right, I am so excited because we have the original Fueligan himself, Stuart Butler, on from Fuel, and these guys are great because they help companies with their marketing, and I could say, or with their online digital marketing, I should say, and listen, now they're not paying me anything. I happen to like these guys. I think they're smart, and Stuart's got a great accent. Welcome aboard, Stuart.
Thanks, Glenn. Glad to be back on the show. It's been a while.
I'll tell you what, you really do sound like you're from Myrtle Beach, because when I hear that voice, I say the Carolinas.
That's funny. You know, everyone guesses I'm Australian because there's this weird phenomenon that's happened. I've got this English accent. I say the certain consonants the English way, but I draw my vowels like a South Carolinian, so
right.
end up sounding Aussie.
Yeah,
that's
that's pretty funny, man. Because I went to a school technically below the Mason-Dixon line. It was Maryland. It wasn't too south, but I combined my New York with that. And I'm like, what's up, y'all? So,
yeah, I still can't rock the y'alls. It doesn't work when I say it.
Yeah, it rolls off naturally from my tongue now. But I know you guys out there. I know you're all excited to hear us talk about great accent, regional dialects, and stuff like that. But no, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to focus on really issues that matter most to all of you. And Stuart, I'm glad that you reached out to me because this is going to be an interesting conversation. And I'll admit, everybody out there listening, I don't know anything about this subject, which is why we're gonna put Stuart front and center on this one. Now, Stuart, we've been hearing in the years and years and years, Google is going to try to take over everything. Yep. When it comes to making reservations in the hospitality business and driving people towards their systems. But I haven't really seen all of this kind of materialize in the way I expected to. Now, why do you say now things are different? And then we'll get into what we can expect.
Yeah, well, I mean, Google have been planning this for a long, long time.
Right.
And it's like the bamboo analogy. They've been laying the groundwork and the roots have been growing out. And now all of a sudden we're going to see this take off in the next 12 to 24 months.
Okay.
And we're already seeing it in other industries. They're decimating things like looking for jobs, where you look at folks like Monster and Indeed that had such a foothold. Well, Google decided, hey, this is a big industry now. Let's get into that. And they've gone to where they have a massive market share in those industries. And the big thing that's really scaring a lot of people, and we'll dive into a little bit here, is this zero-click phenomena.
Right.
So basically 50% of all searches now on Google result in no clicks happening whatsoever because Google's fulfilling the need. So no one's going anywhere from Google. They're staying in a Google asset.
All right. So I don't think I quite understand that. So I'm going to get you to clarify that in 1 second. Yep. But before we even get to that point, I feel like it's a lot of what we're seeing in the retail universe, but in the digital world. Yep. Amazon seems to be eating up so many other different types of companies and purchases that we're making that as we're recording this, companies like Macy's are closing over 200 stores, blah blah blah, that kind of a thing, because they've slowly been building and creating the habits within people to work within their ecosystem. I'm on Google, I type in a search term, and I'm starting to see more often Google-only apps on there. Is that what you mean by zero click?
Well, it's a combination, right? So it's two things. One, out of all the searches you can make now, if it's a question like, how old is Glenn Hausman? I encourage all your listeners to go type that in. It may or may not come up. I don't know how famous you are, right? But if you type in how old was Isaac Newton when he died, or what year did Isaac Newton die, the answer is going to be right there in the search results. So you think, what does that really mean for us as hotels? Well, what if someone's typing in, I'm going to a conference in a couple of weeks, the Navigate conference in San Antonio. So if I typed into Google, where is the Navis conference, then what's going to show up is the La Cantera Resort in San Antonio.
Right.
It's going to be right there. I don't have to click anywhere. And then I might go from there and say, well, is La Cantera Resort pet friendly? And right there in the search results, it's going to tell me. And then I might want to say, well, does it offer free breakfast? And again, the answer is going to be right there.
Right.
What time is check-in? The answer's right there.
Okay. So, putting this into, terms that I've actually experienced, I'm watching a TV show. I've just gotten into it. I want to Google an actor, actress, writer, director that's in it, and I kind of type in their name, and there's a box on the side that shows pictures of the individual. It shows a lot of times Wikipedia information, and I find I don't even have to click over to Wikipedia in order to get that information I'm making. So my hunch is Wikipedia misses out on that contact with me. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. Okay. They're losing ad revenue. They're using the opportunity to collect data on you. So, and it's happening in every industry. It's happening in the restaurant industry. It's happening in even things like dictionaries. So Merriam-Webster used to dominate from if I typed in what's the definition of a word or how do I spell a word. But now Google's actually scraping the content from Merriam-Webster and using that as the answer. So Merriam-Webster doesn't even get the traffic and the opportunity to monetize that.
Wow.
And the same thing. going to be happening here. And there's a lot of lawsuits flying around.
I was just about to say, how is this even legal? Because you're not stealing, because you're not stealing the copyright information.
Right.
You're just making it visible. So there's a legal nuance there, I guess. Right?
Exactly. It's very complex. But so a company called Genius.com, which a lot of the kids use to look up lyrics to songs, they were curious as to how Google was getting their lyrics. So they set up this plot, which was really interesting. So if you look at an apostrophe, there's two ways to do an apostrophe. You can do it with a straight character and you can do it with a curly character. Still an apostrophe as you read it.
Correct.
So they kind of set up this trap where it was almost like Morse code. So they went through a lot of their lyrics and they put some in as straight apostrophes, some as curly apostrophes, and then waited to see what happened. And sure enough, Google's lyrics now were exactly the same. So they had this fingerprint that said they're actually taking the content from our site and using that and not sourcing us. So they filed a lawsuit, and a week later, Google started sourcing them. So Google's response is basically, you don't have to let us index your content. You have the choice. If you don't want us to index the content, you can just put in your robots.txt file, no index, and we won't scrape any of your content. It's entirely up to you. Well, okay, if I do that, then I lose all my visibility on Google in its entirety. So no one's going to make that.
It appears as if companies have freedom of choice, but in all practicality, their options have been stripped from them, because if you're not going to play ball with Google, what are you going to do? Be available on Ask Jeeves? I mean, I don't know if anyone's used that since 2004. Right?
Yeah. So to put that in context, Google controls over 94% of all searches online.
So practically everything.
So when you look at the web searches, the image searches, even YouTube. So YouTube alone has more searches performed on a daily basis than Yahoo and Bing combined.
Wow.
So you really don't have the opportunity to go elsewhere for your search needs unless every human being on the planet decides to boycott Google overnight. Which is not going to happen
we know
because
that's
Google has a great experience, which is why we always all use Google.
Right, and why it's Google has become a word that we all know in society.
Exactly.
Now,
yeah,
right?
it's the verb, right? It's synonymous with searching. We Google things on Bing now. It's crazy.
It's so true to her. Okay. So, you indicated that, this could be bad for hotels.
Yeah.
But what's curious to me is, if I want people to stay at my hotel, why do I really care if they're getting their information directly from my website or information that's scraped from my website for things like what time is check-in time?
Yeah, so let's kind of break that down a little bit. So yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of the zero-click opportunities are actually a really positive thing if you can own them, right? So if you can push out the right content, because every question that people are asking to search engines is trying to get them to the next point. It might be that they have a hurdle that's preventing them from booking. So if they find out that check-in time is 3 p.m., that might be the answer they needed to now go on and book. So that's a great thing. Excellent. But what Google's doing beyond this zero-click answer box, they're also trying to control the entire booking process. Yep. So now with their Google Hotel ads, they actually have a feature called Book on Google, where you never leave Google. The actual transaction happens within a Google ecosystem. And I was at a conference late last year. It was the Direct Booking Summit, and there was a leader of Google Travel there, and someone asked him the question about, well, why are you doing this? And he literally said, because we believe we can give the consumer a better experience than the hotel can from the booking perspective, because so many hotels have a garbage mobile experience, and that's where a lot of people want to convert. So he said it's better for the consumer if they book on Google. So, okay, that's part of the ecosystem. And again, the question would be, well, why is that a bad thing? If they're booking with me through Google, that's better than them booking on an OTA.
Okay, so let me take a guess on why this would be bad, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, and then give us more context on it. So, it seems to me this is the same thing that happened with OTAs, right? Yep. It seemed like a good idea at first, and it comes in being rational, but after a period of time, you start to realize, oh, you've retrained your customers to go elsewhere, and now Google is taking, or the traditional OTA is taking a big chunk out of your potential profitability.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Give that man a prize. So
I win nothing.
So in the short term, the people who are scared are the OTAs. So you've got
they should be, because they're they're the ones that are going to be knocked out first. The hotel's still going to get that booking, but why should I go to classic OTA if I don't have to, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Google's going to cut out the middleman first. Ooh. So you already see this. If you look at the stock prices of, say, TripAdvisor and Expedia over the last 6 months, back in November when they released their financial statements, they took a nosedive in their stock price. So Wall Street's really paying attention, and how they're trying to combat this.
And Stuart, let me just add one level of context to that. And then they got the board got rid of their top people.
Yeah, they cleaned house at Expedia, and then just a couple of weeks ago, TripAdvisor announced they're laying off 200 employees.
Holy cow.
And they said directly as a result of pressure from Google. So this is not a secret. This is out in the open. It's a battle that's being waged, and Google is winning. And the OTAs are definitely scared right now.
Interesting.
Even the CEO of Booking.com came out and said how they're struggling to figure this out. So they're doing two things. One, they're spending more on brand advertising, so TVs and TV commercials and digital display ads, things like that. But two, they're also trying to find a way to get deeper into the value chain of the experience. So if you look at, say, Booking.com just last week launched their CityBook app, which is more of an experiential tool versus a booking tool. So they're trying to find ways to get to the consumer without Google, which is obviously the right kind of strategy. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do it. So in the short term, this sounds wonderful and utopian, right? The evil empire of the OTAs is going to get squashed by the savior, the rebel alliance of Google.
I was about to say, but then you wait a couple of years and along comes Kylo Ren and everything's effed up again.
Exactly right. So once Google has the monopoly, right now we're in this kind of duopoly with Booking and Expedia, but we're heading rapidly towards a monopoly of just Google. And so they're going to want their share. And maybe in the short term, it'll save us some money on advertising, but in the long term, we're going to have to pay to play, because if you go and make any search today for your brand, you're going to see ad all around. Google's monetizing the heck out of their search engine results page, and they're going to continue to do that. So Google's getting their share multiple ways, and we're going to end up in a situation where we're beholden almost exclusively for all of our business to this one entity, which is a really scary proposition.
It really is a scary proposition, and it very well could happen. I kind of equate this whole thing to that, at this point, cliched analogy of the frog in the water and slowly turning up the temperature. We're all sitting here having a nice bath and not even realize what's going on because we've been lulled into complacency. And then, boom, one day we're all boiling to death.
Yeah, those bubbles were not in a jacuzzi.
Right.
That's boiling water for sure. So, yeah, it's a scary proposition. And, some people are saying, well, government's going to step in. Well, that's probably not the best strategy. Hope is not a strategy. So let's not wait and see what happens there, because they're trying to figure out some issues right now, especially in the U.S. government. So what can hotels do?
Right.
So first I look at the chains and what are they doing? Because they're obviously typically ahead of the curve. They're doing the exact same things the OTA is doing. They're trying to invest in ways to drive more direct bookings through brand advertising. The Hiltons, the Marriotts of the world have increased TV spend by 34% last year. They're also doubling down on their apps and their products which bypass Google. So, Hilton gets more than 20% of its bookings now through its mobile app.
Okay, fascinating.
Bypassing the ecosystem.
I want to stop you right there, because that's a really great point. So you could just totally eliminate Google by talking directly to the consumer through a product and program that you provide to them right on their mobile device. We've seen a lot about these apps, but I think customers were getting a little too overwhelmed by too many apps with too many companies and stuff like that. But you're talking about for folks that are loyal and want to book that way, that's a great route around the problem.
Yeah, and it works for someone like Hilton. So you got to, if you're an individual independent property, you've got to say, well, does it make sense for me? Well, I don't think you have a choice at this point. I think you've got to find as many touch points as you can with the consumer. So there's a few things that we're encouraging our clients to do right now. One is to definitely start investing in understanding the data of the consumer. CRM, customer relationship management, is going to become really, really, really important, especially if you're in a type of destination where guests are going to come back repeatedly. So you definitely got to start understanding the guest better and figure out ways to communicate in a way that is non-intrusive. You're not spamming them, but in a method, in way that they like. So it's a conversation, a one-to-one communication.
Right. So what you're saying is you need to be able to utilize CRM technology to find out that if someone is coming to your hometown of Myrtle Beach to go to a family wedding or reunion, or they're coming down for their annual golf trip or beach trip.
Yeah, exactly. So if you know that Glenn has been to, Myrtle Beach, my hometown, for the last 20 years on a golf trip, let's get out ahead of that and understand what is it he's looking for in that trip. How can I make that experience better? Don't just send him generic golfing information at random times of the year. Be tailored to him. So this is really an opportunity to get to one-to-one communication. The other thing we got to start doing is looking at ways to diversify our traffic sources outside of Google. So definitely investing, even though it's a slither of the total landscape, investing in Bing and Yahoo and other opportunities to do digital advertising, investing in social advocacy, trying to use tools like Flip2 to turn your guests into evangelists for your brand, looking at your local CVBs or destination marketing organizations, and even private portal companies in your area. So if you live in San Antonio, or if your hotel's in San Antonio and someone other than the CVB owns sanantonio.com, go and develop a relationship with them and figure out how can you maximize it, and look for cooperative opportunities with other folks in your area, hotels and non-hotels, and see if you can create demand through other channels than Google. The thought exercise I like to throw out to people is, imagine if Google didn't exist tomorrow. Like, what would you do to market your property if Google didn't exist? That's where a lot of your thought needs to go in 2020. You need to be planning for a Google-less world. Even though Google's going to exist, and in the short term, you need to leverage it as much as you can. In the long term, you really need to think, what would life look like without Google?
Right.
How can I maximize that piece of my business?
Right. And interestingly enough, it is a possibility that one day Google will not be the incredible giant that it is today. We see it happen with all sorts of companies that you think are going to be around forever, right? But if they don't adapt and pivot, disruptors could come in and kind of change everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So, there's a stat that I recently saw at a conference where they were talking about the Fortune 500 companies, and the average lifetime of a company in the Fortune 500 back 50 years ago was 75 years.
Right.
But today the average is 12 years.
Woo.
A company in the Fortune 500 only lasts on average 12 years. A lot of that's mergers and acquisitions, but a lot of it is, industries are changing so rapidly right now that people are being put out of business. And, we're rapidly heading towards probably a voice first scenario where people aren't typing keywords in, they're using their voice. We're already getting close to it in some verticals. Hospitality will probably be a little bit further behind, but that's one of the reasons that Google's doing what they're doing with the zero click stuff, where they're showing these answers to questions. They're showing the definitive answer at the top because they're preparing for a voice first world. So whether Google dominates that space, whether Amazon does, we don't know yet. That battle is being, is playing out now. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But it's certainly going to change. What our landscape looks like today is going to be very different in 5 years' time. All
right. So I think so far the takeaways from this are: invest in software tools that'll get you closer to your existing customer and customers that might have the potential for you to turn into to loyal. Think about ways to utilize apps to get them to go directly through your ecosystem as opposed to other ecosystems. And then again, invest in other categories beyond Google to help buffet your business that way. And check out some of the smaller performers which still have a chance to do well in the future. What else do we need to know, Stuart?
Yeah, and I think probably the most important thing you can be doing right now is investing in the product, right? Making sure that you're not deferring that maintenance, making sure that you are doing everything you can to not scrimp and save on things like housekeeping and maintenance, making sure that every guest that comes to your property has a great experience and has a relationship with you. And the relationship is going to be with people. So this trend that we're going towards of automation and front desks that don't have human beings, they have kiosks and things like that. That's going to play into a transactional world that Google's going to benefit from.
Right. That's why I encourage everybody out there to take those man hours and repurpose them. Utilize workflow optimization software so you can cut back on back-of-house type of stuff that doesn't affect the guest. Think about that breakfast area. Think about deploying somebody out there just to talk to guests. Yep. Think about that bar on how you could make sure that bartenders are making memories for your customers as well. So there's no excuse. You have the people in place. Just make sure that you're not short-sighted and try to save a few bucks at the overall expense for the long-term health and viability of your product.
Yeah, the lens through which you need to look at when you're budgeting. So things like, is the thread count, can I save a few bucks by lowering the thread count of the sheets or the towels? Well, yeah, you can in the short term maybe save a few bucks, but what impact does that have on the guest experience? And if we're in this existential battle with Google right now to make sure that we control the guest in terms of the experience, that's really our ace in the hole. That's the one thing we can control that Google cannot, is them coming and staying on our property. So we need to put in all our effort right now on making sure that's the best possible. And the analogy I always use with people is you've got to be an innkeeper. You've got to give people that warm feeling of hospitality that is so lacking in our industry in a lot of places. People are focused on the RevPAR and the profitability, which is important because we're running a business, but they lose sight of guest. Every strategy should be a guest first strategy. If you do that well, then you're going to be fine, and you're going to find that your competition that isn't focused on that stuff is going to struggle in this new era. And so you're going to be able to take more of the lion's share of the market.
Right. Great. I think that's really well said. Anything else that you want to add on this particular topic, Stuart?
Well, we kind of bashed on Google a little bit. So the other thing I would say is definitely in the short term, you have no choice but to play ball with Google. So definitely invest in Google hotel ads. It gives a phenomenal return on investment. Google ads in general. And then there's a free thing you can do that a lot of people don't take advantage of, which is Google My Business. So if you go to Google and type in your brand name, on the right-hand side there's what used to be Google Local is now called Google My Business. Go make sure you've claimed your listing and optimize that. There's a lot of opportunities there to put in the amenities you have, put in great photography, put in answers to questions, FAQs, things like that. So really take the time to maximize that experience. And once you've done that, what you'll start to realize is your homepage in today's reality isn't your website. Your homepage is Google. Oh my
gosh, it is.
Right?
You're so right.
You've got to put your best foot forward on Google before you do anything else. And then take that same philosophy into your own website and into your Expedia profile and your TripAdvisor profile and everywhere else that you exist online. Because even though Google's going to have the majority of visibility, these others, add up. So you got to make sure that you have the best footprint you have online everywhere you look.
That's right. And let me just underscore the point that he made about great photography. Don't go outside and take pictures of yourself. You guys operate and run hotels. You're not professional photographers. Go and pay for that service. It is so important right now, and even maybe short video clips and stuff like that. I got no eggs in this basket. I'm not making any money on you guys getting good pictures or videos, but I think that's a better way to accurately represent your property to the way customers are thinking before they click that book button. Stuart, how can we find you? I understand you're also going to be discussing this at a couple of upcoming conferences and stuff this springtime.
Yeah,
right?
So the next conference I'll be presenting on this topic is going to be the Navigate conference in San Antonio on March 2nd through 4th. I think there's still tickets available for that. That's Navis's annual, used to be a user conference, but it's become a really big industry conference. Lots of smart people there talking about all the latest and greatest trends. So I'll be presenting there.
And I will not be there because they said the smartest people will be there.
One of these days our schedules are going to sync up. And, we've talked so many times and we've never met in person.
It's embarrassing, Stuart. Stuart.
I know. I promise I'm not avoiding you. But you can find out about that conference at navis.com.
Right.
And then, if you want to learn more about Fuel, what we're doing, we have a weekly podcast that's really taken off. We get a lot of great feedback from that, talking about tactical things hotels can do to drive direct bookings. We're going to do an episode covering Google here soon, but that's at fueltravel.com/podcast. Or if you just type in hotel marketing podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, you'll find that as well.
Excellent. I really like these guys. I think they do some great stuff. So if you have room in your schedule for another podcast, of course, after you listen to ours, listen to Fuel. These guys know what they're talking about, and they're going to give you great practical tips that you need to, I hate to say it, fuel your business, right?
Hey.
Excellent. All right, Stuart, thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank everybody for listening, and we're going to be right back with another great segment right after this, so stick around.
Have a question for your host, Glenn? Tweet him now at Traveling Glenn. No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast. We'll be right back.
If you look back over the past half century or so, in the world of economy hotels, there's probably no brand more iconic than Red Roof. After all, Red Roof consistently offers one of the highest RevPARs in its segment and has been #1 in online reviews 9 years running. Not to mention being voted best budget hotel brand by USA Today readers 3 of the past 5 years. That's probably because they're careful to make sure standards reflect guest expectations, are fully tested, and well priced. And because they own and operate properties themselves, well, they got skin in the game, and they share the same goals as their franchisees. Then, of course, don't forget about Red Roof Plus, the brand extension that created the upscale economy market with wood-like flooring, high-end bedding, spa-inspired baths, enhanced landscaping, and more. All of it based on consumer research, and all having a dramatic effect on owners' bottom line. And I hear all the time, great cash flow too. In other good news, all Red Roof offerings come with Ready Rewards, the richest in-class loyalty program with nearly 3 million members, and that just happens to be the least expensive loyalty program for owners. You got that right. Put it all together, and it's no surprise, Red Roof's franchisee satisfaction is at 90%. And those franchisees will also tell you genuine relationships, real results. It's not just a slogan. It's just how Red Roof does business. So true. Love these guys. I have such a great time every single time I hang out with them because they are real people, right? So today's your opportunity to join them. Visit redrooffranchising.com. Call 888-473-8861. That's 888-473-8861. And tell them Glenn sent you. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to the No Vacancy podcast. So I am particularly excited for this next interview. So, I'm talking to all the major CEOs of all the major hotel companies, all the big design companies, all the major players within the industry. Well, forget about that today. We're trying something different. We're here in the middle of the summer. I wanted to take a break, do something different, do something fun, and talk to some of those people that are staying in the hotels and what those experiences are like. So what better way than to find one of the country's top stand-up comedians, that Mr. Dan Cummins, who also happens to have a podcast, which we'll get to in a minute. Dan, welcome aboard the show. Super excited to have a guy of your caliber chatting with me today. Do you all of a sudden hate yourself and want to subject yourself to having to talk to me? What's the deal, Dan?
No, man. Thank you. I know. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me on, man. I know that you are speaking of podcasts and everything like a BDM, and I'm very, very loyal to Tom and Dan with the Mediocre Time and to all their supporters. And yeah, so when Lindsay, my wife, said that there's a BDM with an awesome podcast and wants me on, it was a done deal.
That's awesome. Well, I happen to like Tom and Dan were great. I was on their show a couple of years ago before I started this version of the of the podcast. Really funny guys, really interesting guys. So you have your own show, which I think is a great way for us to get into this. It's a show called Timesuck, and I happen to particularly love it because I love podcasts, I love history, I love comedy. You seem to hit all of those things in one. Very interesting, very creative. Tell me a little bit about Timesuck with Dan Cummins.
Yeah, man, it's been a fun ride, Glenn. It's been, I started it, late September of 2016. So this September, I guess, will come up just on, 2 years.
Wow.
And, initially it was an idea that, people in my industry and like, in the stand-up comedy kind of world and comedy podcast world were not that interested in. They didn't think the concept was marketable. Why are people going to listen to one guy talk about historical kind of deep dives, and not every episode is historical, but just talk about one subject per episode. And I believe that I could make all these subjects interesting and fun and accessible. Cause I feel like, there's a lot of curious people out there who want to learn about everything from Roman history to, true crime. But a lot of times the presentation isn't that gripping for some people. If it's a more traditional academic presentation, that doesn't do it for everybody. Some people, they kind of tune out once it goes to that kind of NPR monotone delivery style, which is great for some people, but not for everybody. So I thought, well, what if I could make, the same, and some of the subjects are definitely more academic, and take those kind of academic subjects and give it a little bit more of like a blue collar kind of comedic spin. And not blue collar in the sense of like, the blue collar comedy tour, but just more like everyday kind of man accessibility, man and woman.
Yep.
And I started doing that, and it took off. And then I added my weird sense of humor to it, which seemed to help it. And now we got like a huge listener base. And it's been such a fun ride to find, so many people are also interested in being curious and learning and evolving and kind of pushing themselves and being willing to talk to people with different, political ideologies or different, spiritual belief systems. Because I think the media right now really kind of pushes a lot of like polarization of like, the liberals are different than the conservatives.
Yep.
And on and on and on. And, at the end of the day, we're just all trying to figure out the world around us.
Oh, Dan, you're
fun to do it.
Yeah, you're so right. Cause, I find with, politics, it's all just become, so antagonistic, and it's about, one side winning as opposed to all of us coming together as Americans for the betterment of this country. It's so toxic. It's so exhausting. I can't really deal with it. That's why I love a podcast like Timesuck with Dan Cummins, because you take me out of that for a couple of hours. I don't have to worry about, MSNBC or Fox News or all of this stuff infiltrating my brains for an hour. I could focus on really uplifting topics like the story of Jack the Ripper or the Green River Killer, So
right.
all of these great things.
Those are definitely really, really dark, I like to mix it up. I like to mix up the dark ones with maybe, I guess, even like a Joan of Arc story is dark. But what I like about like thrown in the historical ones is I truly believe that knowledge is power. And like, all the things that we're dealing with today in modern society, it really isn't that new. Like the essence of all the stories we're dealing with now, history really does repeat itself. And I feel like the more you can learn about people's lives, historical figures and just interesting moments in history, the better equipped you are to deal with just life in general. And when, like we just talked about politics, when some political issue comes up, you may not know that particular politician's background, but you understand the angle they're selling. You understand the big picture thing they're talking about because you've already learned about it time and time again through various, kind of historical lessons. So I really, that motivates me a little more to just try to spread as much kind of knowledge as possible, because the better informed we are, the better lives we're going to lead,
Yeah.
And serial killers are fun to learn about.
They really
There's
are.
More of a fascination there. I don't know how redeeming those episodes are, but it's fun.
Yeah, that's for sure, Dan. I got to tell you, the Tupac and Biggie episode from last February really taught me a lot about today's politics. It's almost like the same kind of thing. Fame, money, murder, all of it together. And I should say, I was just turned on to Netflix, and I saw this new series called Dark Tourism, and I don't know if you've seen it yet, but the second episode,
I heard about it.
The second episode, they talk about, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Aokigahara, Japan's suicide forest, which you did an episode on recently.
Yep, exactly.
And I'm like, oh, this guy's totally stealing Dan's lines here. It was crazy. Really,
but like even on an episode like that, what I like Tupac and Biggie, you're just learning about the biographies of like hip hop people, but then you could also learn through that episode about like, elements of the crack epidemic that hit America in, in the 80s and different things, and kind of how that affected society a little bit. And with the suicide forest, that was an interesting, lesson to me about how differently one culture can view suicide than another, And then obviously that, got a little bit into the history of the samurai with their tradition there, but it's just, that reminder of, what can be so taboo in one culture can be revered in another one. I just find that stuff fascinating, and like suicide, historically in Japan, so suicide seen as an honorable act. Right.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing how you bring in, all of that cultural aspect into the history, because it's so important for us to learn. And I think your episode specifically on the Aztec Empire, for example, with all of that human sacrifice, really put things into mind. I liked how you were, you're talking about how, the Europeans might have been bad, but these people were really into human sacrifice, and all we're doing is trying to paint a positive eye on it, when maybe that's not really the true story of what happened.
Yeah, it is funny how things shift, with whatever historian is kind of telling the tale. But I think, there can be these, kind of revisionist movements where it's like, the Spanish conquistadors were terrible and how dare they exploit these people. And they did. And I'm not, and that's why I like that story. It's like, yeah, they did do a lot of terrible things, and they were terrible in a lot of ways. But you also learn that, the Aztec culture wasn't some noble, peaceful, wonderful culture. It's like they were continually butchering the members of the various tribes that inhabited the region around them in the most, horrific ways. Right. So it's like, it's funny to me how, that those details get lost a lot of times because I feel like a lot of historians, just kind of like the media we're talking about, they lose track of being objective, and instead they want to push a narrative to make their story sexier or something. So they want to push bad Europeans taking advantage of indigenous people, and then they leave all the details out that don't fit that narrative. Kind of like how the media does that now, where it's like, this angle or whatever, or this group of, this demographic is terrible. And then they tell the story and they just fill it with details that fit, the story they want to tell. And I think that's what people like about Timesuck too, is I try really hard to be honest and to be as objective as I humanly can be.
Right. Yeah. And one thing that I did learn is I thought I was under a lot of pressure in high school being a virgin and all, but I would hate to have been a virgin in Aztec times. I mean, I was going to get my heart pulled out if,
Yeah, that boosted you up on the potential sacrifice list for sure.
Yeah. So, I want to know, how did you get into stand-up comedy? And to be honest with you, Dan, I was in an improv group when I was in college and a little out of college, but I was too self-conscious. I wasn't able to really be in the moment. I know, I wasn't very good with the yes and, because I was all up in my own head when it came to improv. Plus, we had one guy in the group that wound up becoming, a superstar. You may know him as the star of, King of Queens, and he was so over the top that it made me feel really insecure. Plus, honestly, Dan, my parents are too good to me, and I wasn't damaged enough to be that funny. So, how did you get involved in stand-up comedy? What was that process like?
I always just liked creative expression. Some kind of, I was a kid who doodled and messed around with, music a little bit, and always had kind of a healthy imagination. And then I really didn't, it wasn't a plan early on. I was more into music in college, but I did a little bit of sketch comedy. And then after, I always liked Saturday Night Live, but I wasn't like a stand-up junkie or anything. And then really it was just, I was doing a lot of soul searching the year after I graduated from college. And there was a lot of different possibilities I was looking at, graphic design and going back into trying to get into teaching, going back to school. And then I heard about this open mic at a comedy club. And I guess what appealed to me about stand-up specifically is that you don't have to rely on a group to accomplish anything. It's like, as a kid, I hated working in groups because, right or wrong, I always felt like, I would get stuck with the lion's share of work, or they wouldn't want to do it the way I wanted to do it. I've always kind of been a creative control freak. Mm-hmm. And even when I was in the band, it's like, I was hesitant to accept, I guess, other band members' ideas. And I think stand-up just appealed to my temperament, where it's like, oh, okay, I get to make up whatever stories I want, real stories, fake stories. There's really very few rules other than just be funny, and And then if that works, I don't have to worry about a band member potentially wanting to no longer do it and ruining the whole thing.
Right.
And so I just like the solo aspect of it, and I just like that creative process where, like with a song, you might have to work on a song for months or whatever, and then you work on it in the studio and you record it, and then eventually you debut it. Or I guess you could debut it in your live show in some form, but it usually takes a long time from initial thoughts to letting other people hear it to decide if they like it or not. But what I like about stand-up is the immediacy of it, where you can think of something or I can, think of something and often this has happened at 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon, and then I throw it out into a show and let a couple hundred people hear it that night at 8 o'clock. And when it works, I'm like, cool. Something I hadn't even thought of when I had breakfast this morning is now something that makes people laugh and, and brings entertainment to people. And I love just how quickly you can learn if something's funny or not. And
what's the process? What's the process like, Dan, when you come up and you have those germs of an idea and you get them out for the first time? And even if it sucks, that doesn't mean that the joke doesn't have potential to be the best one you've ever written, right? So I'm curious as to what that process is like when you're on stage developing the material, because in my life, when I'm doing a lot of public speaking gigs, moderating panels, hosting keynote events at hotel companies and stuff, I try to bring the funny and I try to be spontaneous and in the moment, to always be listening to react to create those jokes. Sometimes they fall flat, but I know somewhere in there's an opportunity for me to pull it out in a different form later.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. I have the same thing where I think it comes with doing it, a number of years. Like initially, I feel like when I first started with stand-up, it's new. Your brain hasn't made the new connections yet to kind of make this easier. You're at the very bottom of the learning curve, and you know how you've made people laugh in your personal life before, but that doesn't necessarily translate to stage. And so, it takes several years to kind of find your voice. A lot of people say, 5 to 10 years of doing stand-up to really find a consistent voice on stage. And so initially you're throwing stuff all over the place. And there would be things that I thought was funny, but the crowd reacted so negatively that I would just kind of not try them again. But then sometimes those old ideas I would bring back literally a decade later and be like, oh, okay, now I know enough about what I'm doing to make that idea work. Right. And I do remember reading something in a book about comedy where the really good comics can make any idea funny. Like a bad comic has to rely on inherently funny premises to kind of get laughs. But if you get far enough into your craft, you can take literally anything and you can find your angle on it to make it funny. And I think that's, after a while you reach that point, and then like you said, just because something doesn't work that night, I don't think oh, that's a terrible idea. I just think, oh, I'm not bringing them into the idea the correct way. So I got to find a new angle.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I see this, and for all of you listeners out there, I see stand-up comedy really as a metaphor for all of our careers and what we're trying to achieve. That when you first start out, you really do suck, and you have to learn and figure out what your personal voice is, and then be able to translate in a way that connects with people, with that audience, whether it's your boss, whether it's your coworkers, whether it is people on stage or not. So how do you get through that early years of when you have no experience, so inherently you're going to wind up, getting booed off the stage and crashing, and you're not going to kill, except on the very rare occasion for those first number of years.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to be a stubborn person. You got to have, it's funny, my kids' schools now, they talk about perseverance, and I do wonder, maybe I'm just getting older, and it's just a typical thing of being annoyed by the younger generation just irrationally, but sometimes I do wonder if the generation coming up has the same amount of perseverance and tenacity that maybe the few previous generations above them kind of had, because I don't know, I just see people want to give up so quickly now, and part of me wonders if it's that instant famous kind of culture we live in where people can blow up on YouTube overnight and people can blow up on Instagram overnight, and reality shows make people stars overnight, where when I started I just kind of accepted that the path is that this is going to be painful for a while, and I'm going to have to pay a lot of dues, and it's going to be up and downs. But, I just felt like if there was more ups and downs, I'd stick with it. And I had, so many terrible shows so many shows where the venue didn't like me, the crowd didn't like me, people didn't want to pay me. It went so bad. And that's not fun. That's really not fun.
It sounds like you're describing my experience of living in my house. So not stand-up comedy.
But I mean, to go, I mean, there's intimidating for people getting into stand-up where it's like, yeah, there are going to be nights when you walk into a room where you don't know anybody and then nobody there, cares about you. And 2 hours later, everyone in that room does know who you are and none of them like you. And it's not like, they don't like your product. They don't like you as a human being.
Right.
Like, you disgust them, you bore them, which to me is almost worse than disgusting them. And there's no way of getting around that. That's just going to be painful. And that's why when people ask me about getting into stand-up now and they want a bunch of help before they've ever got on stage, I refuse to give it to them. It's like I'm not going to take a bunch of time and mentor somebody who hasn't even had the courage to get up there yet, and because I know that odds are probably 90% of the people who are thinking or more aren't going to survive the first few months. It's just going to be too painful for their ego. But if you can get through it, then you can, just like anything else, like you said, you can really do some great things. And I do think it applies to life in general. It's like the podcast we were talking about where, just earlier where this has been painful. It's grown very successfully, but every week I have to learn some new skill, and that's never really fun, because you feel like an idiot. You're going to make mistakes. You're frustrated that you can't just do it immediately.
Right.
But I just find in life that people who are willing to push past that, early frustrating phase are generally pretty successful in life, no matter what business they're in. So you just gotta accept the bumps and bruises.
Yeah, man, I totally agree with you, Dan. And I think that was what happened to me. I didn't have the fortitude and the inner strength to continue because I couldn't handle that sense of rejection. Maybe it was because I was raised an only child. Maybe it was because my parents were good to me, like I said before. But whatever it was, I didn't have that confidence in me to take all of that shit and then turn it into something that was positive and put it back out and learn from it and grow my skills and realize they don't hate me as a human being. They don't like the message that I'm giving them because it's my fault. I haven't learned the skill necessary to communicate with them the way that the paying customer deserves to be treated and spoken to, for example.
Right.
Right,
it's not for everybody. It's funny. Like some guys getting started, there's no way for this not to sound mean.
Yeah.
But like some guys, when they get started, it's like, yeah, the problem is their material. But other times, unfortunately, the problem really is them. And this isn't about like you at all. Like you sound like a very like well-adjusted person. But as we've learned in Timesuck, there's some terrible people out there, and sometimes those terrible people also think they can get into stand-up. And I've always found that interesting, where it's like they wonder why their message isn't working, and it's because, well, the audience knows that you're terrible. Like you're terrible. In addition to not being funny, you're a terrible person. Right. This isn't going to work for you.
Yeah. Nothing personal, but you're a horrible human being. I love that.
Well, every once in a while you see somebody, they'll say the worst things on stage, and then they'll have this kind of, almost like a catchline of, right, guys? Yeah. And, or right, everybody? And you can just tell the audience, like, no, not right. Right. We don't agree with what you're saying at all.
That's so true. So, Dan, as a stand-up comedian who's traveling around the country all the time, and you're going to be appearing between now and November pretty much everywhere. Dayton, Ohio, Tampa, Florida, West Palm Beach, it goes on and on. Chicago, Denver, Sunnyvale, California, Oxnard, California, Portland, Huntington Beach, Tacoma, it goes on and on and on. Check out dancummins.tv for the full schedule there. But, when you're traveling every single weekend, you've got to stay in hotels. And this is where we get to the bread and butter of this conversation, because I want to know what it's like.
Oh, yeah.
Number one, as a road warrior, what it's like traveling every single weekend. And then maybe we'll get into some specifics about hotel experiences that you have.
Kind of like, with stand-up where in the beginning it's rough and then it gets better as time goes on. I have been lucky where, in the early years, of stand-up, for a lot of years it was very sketchy accommodations. A lot of motels, a lot of smaller market motels, which is generally not good, when it's like obviously there's become kind of this niche bed and breakfast
Right.
kind of travel culture in the U.S. and like, what do they call them? Like I'm trying to think of like the term for kind of like a fancy little motel where like they're really trying. They're really trying to give you like a unique.
Well, I see that the danger is when you go to those boutique hotels, right? Well, those are usually typically fancier now, but in the earlier days, I could totally see how you're staying at some of these properties. They don't have a hotel brand with them; they're independently owned and operated. And then it's a quality place when they say things like now with air conditioning and HBO. Right?
Exactly. I remember my ex-wife. She went out on the road with me early, which was a huge mistake because, I was willing to kind of stay in these places to pay my dues to kind of, do something I loved, creatively. Mm-hmm. But when you're just along for the ride and you're just seeing like, oh man, now we're in one moment, we're in some horrible, trashy kind of roadhouse bar. It's very rough. There wouldn't be a normal place we go to. And then after that, we're going to this, motel where the rug is just, it doesn't look like it's been updated literally since the 1970s. It has those kind of colors and that long,
they still have shag carpet. You don't know how much blood from the bodies is seeped in there.
There we go. Yep. I stayed in a few motels with shag carpet long after shag carpet was in style, and it wasn't like a retro, fitting. It was the original.
Yeah.
And, I stayed in places where I literally would sleep with all of my clothes on top of the, blankets because I did not trust being, in the bed, places, and I wouldn't walk barefoot in the room. And I'm not a germaphobe. It was just that gross, It was terrible little, roadside kind of motels. And then, but now I feel like kind of like I am, I guess, a very experienced traveler. I've been in all 50 states. And done and most of them many, many, many times and many cities within them and, and a decent amount of international travel as well. And, I will say that the travel game has seemed to come up substantially. I mean, I know that there was always the 5-star places for those who could afford them, but now I feel like there's this class of business hotel out there, I'm a big fan of, a lot of comedy clubs for like, as you're kind of coming up in kind of that mid-range level. Like the Hampton Inn or a Holiday Inn Express will be like a good kind of budget decision where they're able to secure a discount rate of, a lot of times like 100, sometimes less a night, in certain kind of smaller markets, even if you don't have that kind of rate that they've established, directly with them, you can even just get it yourself for, under 130 in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. And you get like a really good experience, they'll have like a Hampton. I like that they do the fresh baked cookie, just little touches like that. So it smells good when you come in. They got nice desks, nice outlets. It's funny, all the little things when you're traveling that you really notice. I just want give me a room with plenty of outlets.
Right. Do you actually find rooms with plenty of outlets? Because I've been in the hotel business for 20 years. I keep complaining about this as much as I possibly can. Everybody laughs knowingly, and then I'm crawling under my desk trying to plug in my iPad.
I know, I think in the last year specifically, I've noticed that they've started adding a lot of like those lamps that will have the USB ports, and the desk will have kind of like the built-in USB ports. Definitely, some chains. I don't want to disparage any chains, but there's some chains for sure that need some updating. And then others who have been really good. I actually just stayed in a Clarion hotel, which years ago I'd stayed in them and honestly wasn't that impressed. They had a good price point, but I didn't think they offered much. And then I stayed in one recently that was fantastic. Like really nice room, very modern, good restaurant, located on the hotel premises. And I was impressed. Now, I really do feel like that there's that business class of anywhere from 100 to 200 a night hotels that have become really, really nice.
Yeah, they really have. And, Dan, to educate you a little bit, you're talking about the select service part of the business with the Hampton Inns and the Holiday Inn Expresses, and that's really the meat and potatoes of the industry right now, which is why you've seen such explosive growth with those types of hotels in there. They give you great, clean, comfortable rooms, typically a free breakfast, and they're really affordable to build, and they make the ownership groups, a whole lot of cash because they're giving you what you just said is pretty much a fair exchange for what you get for your dollar. It's all about creating that sense of value for people.
Right. Well, they've done a good job. They've done a good job with it, and then obviously like there's the more kind of, I guess, resort kind of level, which is fantastic. I mean, I've been lucky enough to stay in a lot of those, and that is a nice way to travel. Actually, when I was in Orlando just a few weeks ago, I stayed at one. I hadn't stayed at before. It's a local chain in Orlando. They have several. We stayed at Shingle Creek was the one.
I'm going to say you're talking about Rosen Hotels.
Yes, thank you. The Rosen Hotels. I was really impressed. My wife came along, and they had. I want to say that one had like 6 different restaurants on site, and they had, which I thought was an amazing idea for the ones who can pull it off, because I haven't seen this very often. They had a 24-hour, essentially like a high-end 7-Eleven kind of little store where it wasn't just your it wasn't just your typical concierge or whatever that's called, where you can buy like a razor and deodorant and toothpaste and maybe a couple beverages and a couple like frozen pizza type entrees. It was like a legit lots of different options, little mini grocery store kind of vibe, and that alone really enhanced the experience. So
I like that you're saying that, Dan, because that happens to be another big trend right now. There's a lot of these hotels are starting to get rid of these 24-hour restaurants and even room service in exchange for more upscale grab-and-go places. So guys like you could come in late at night, get food that you feel comfortable with, and have all of those things that you want to purchase that makes sense. So I think it's pretty awesome that you're noticing these trends, even though you don't know the official, thing that they're trends because you're an outsider from the business, but you're experiencing them. And while we're talking about Rosen Hotels, I encourage everyone to check back. Last year, I did an amazing podcast. I think it was of May 2017 with Harris Rosen. He's a true industry icon. You can learn all about his life and how much he gives back to the community. He's actually, Dan, given millions and millions to folks within the community to help rise up all of the city of Orlando through his success. It's a great story.
He did. That's really cool to hear. I mean, that Shingle Creek, he's killed it on that one. I mean, that's been my only experience, but and all the little customer service details where I feel like that to me is a big thing I noticed traveling around, because I feel like on the retail level and society in general, customer service has taken a huge dive the last decade. Where I'm sure some of that is wages. It's like maybe the people working there don't feel like they're getting paid enough, but also it's like I feel like it's a cultural thing where, kind of go back to not wanting to pay dues. There's a large amount of people who, haven't put themselves educationally in a position to get a better job, but still feel entitled to a better job, and so they're angry at work. And man, as a traveler, I encounter that all the time, where you just get so sick of feeling like you're bothering somebody when you're just asking them to do their job, or feeling like they don't care at all about you. And the customer service, specifically at Shingle Creek, just little things like, there was a lightning storm in the area, and we had reserved a cabana, and we didn't get to use it. And, some places would still like, okay, we'll give you a partial discount, or they might fight. Immediately like, oh, of course, no worries, no charges whatsoever. Sorry about the inconvenience. And then I think they actually gave us something on top of that.
Wow.
That stuff to me, immediately in my head, I'm like, oh, okay. When I'm coming through, this is where I'm coming back to. I'm going to come back to this place specifically. And, and like that little detail earlier, and I hope I am getting it correct. I've stayed in too many places, but I believe it is Hampton that gives you the warm cookies.
It's actually DoubleTree.
DoubleTree, that's it. Hampton has cookies, but they're not warm.
Right.
That's right. Hampton will set them out. You're right. DoubleTree. Oh my gosh, thank you. DoubleTree, that little touch. Well, I guess, I've done a horrible job of actually remembering, but if I would have been making a hotel reservation, I would have figured it out before I clicked buy. But it's such a little thing. It can't cost them all that much, to make those cookies. But when you've been traveling, you've had 2 or 3 flights, and, you've been 12 hours either on a plane or in an airport, and you've bounced around from a couple time zones, it makes a huge difference. like little touches like that make a huge difference.
Well, it's great that you're saying that, Dan, because a lot of times in our industry, we think about like those great customer service stories, like, oh, somebody forgot medicine, so the guy ran to the, to a 24-hour CVS, 4 hours away in the middle of the night in order to get somebody. But I think that for the day-to-day professionals, it's really about delivering on those small little things, creating those little moments that make you as a customer connect better with the experience of the hotel.
Oh yeah, just in business in general, and just little moments like and this is flight. I guess this is in the hotel, but just for business in general, I fly a ton, and I fly primarily on Delta. It's just the one that works the best for where I'm at.
Yeah, same here.
Airport wise. Okay, cool. Yeah, and they've been really good to me, and I've been dining with them for a while now, and like I think I'm literally just a few miles, like 10,000 away from the million mile thing, which is kind of cool / sad, that I fly now.
It's so true. It's great for cocktail party conversation, but really depressing when you think about all those miles, all those hours lost.
I know, all those flights, but we were, my wife and I were sitting there, on a flight back we were in San Diego this last weekend. It's nice that she's able, because of the podcast, able to kind of travel with me, a fair amount now. We're able to bring the kids and stuff,
awesome.
A fair amount. But like I think on the way down there had been a delay of 2 hours, 2.5 hours, some kind of mechanical delay. And then on our way back, one of the, flight attendants took the time to hey, Mr. and Mrs. Cummins, we just want to, apologize on behalf of Delta for the flight delay, you experienced, back on Thursday. We pride ourselves. I mean, she did it in a really nice way. And just the fact that it was even said, I feel like most companies would not add that personal touch. And the fact that they did, again, just kind of reinforced my loyalty to that particular brand.
That's pretty cool. Makes sense. And you're diamond, so you're having a completely different experience than me. I'm platinum, so they'll throw me a Biscoff cookie and tell me to take a seat. But at least,
right.
And then one year I had diamond, and then, because of the way it worked out, I wound up dropping back to gold, and I really felt like a pariah, both in the, both for the airline and during cocktail parties when we start talking about status. It was very humbling. I got to tell you, Dan.
It is funny when you get, diamond, depending on what airport you're based, you get upgraded so often that you really do get spoiled, where I think for the first time in probably 20 flights, I had to, sit in coach where I traveled for years. I traveled primarily in coach for many years, all over the place. And, and it was fine. But then now that I've had a taste of the other side and a big taste, going back there, it just felt like I was now an outcast. Like society had just shunned me.
Right.
And it, I hated it. I hated it so much.
Yeah. It's so sad. I mean, our poor first world problems that we have here.
Yeah. First world problems.
Oh,
yeah.
Goodness. So it's good to see that you're a Delta fan. I'm a big Delta fan too. So any good story that you have before we wrap up about any horrific, horrible, nightmarish hotel experience you had that you want to you want to share? I always love those kinds of things.
Oh yes, you will like this one then.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty bad one. It was less than 2 years into me doing stand-up. So this is back in this is back in 2000. 1 or 2002 at the very latest. I think it might have even been a year in it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, 2001, 2002, and I was, I decided to do this big Greyhound adventure, which was not fun. It was, long trips on the Greyhound where maybe it's gotten better at this time. It was not a real fun way to travel. Very, I would say, interesting characters on the bus with me. A lot of times when people get released from being incarcerated,
right,
they get a Greyhound ticket. So
I know I used to take the bus from Grand Central down to Atlantic City, so I know exactly the type of experience that you're going for here. Go on.
Okay, yeah. So I did this, and one of the last legs was this crazy trip from Tucson, Arizona, all the way to Grand Forks, North Dakota, which was over 40 hours on buses.
Oh,
and there was a bus exchange in Omaha, and I didn't even think it was possible for a bus to lose your luggage, and it is. They lost my luggage. in Omaha. Went on the wrong bus when they did the exchange. And so I show up wearing clothes fit for Tucson, clothes that I've been wearing for 2 days now. And I show up in Grand Forks, and it was the time of year, it was like early fall where it had been 90-something degrees in Tucson, but snowed, like they had a huge snowstorm in Grand Forks, North Dakota. So I get there, and it's, there's snow on the ground. I'm not prepared for anything. And then they put me in this hotel, and this is the worst hotel I've ever stayed at. Partially not its fault. It's no longer around anymore, I don't think. But it was called the Westward Ho. And it was
I remember that brand.
Okay. Well, yeah, the Westward Ho there is like a big Western theme where, like an old kind of 19th century, Wild West theme originally. And it had been kind of like a mini convention center at one time where they had like a cool restaurant and bar and big pool area for the kids. A place that honestly probably peaked in the 70s or 80s.
Right.
And then there was a huge flood in the late 90s or around 99, 2000, somewhere around there in Grand Forks, where a lot of the town got flooded, including this hotel. And so they condemned, or, until it was repaired, most of the hotel, including the restaurant. All the amenities were gone when I showed up. And I don't remember even like another guest. There was like one little wing of the hotel that was still open.
Wow.
It was on its last legs. It was, there was like no amenities. There was no place to get snacks, like nothing. And it was right maybe 2 blocks down from this sugar beet processing facility. And I don't know if you've ever been by one of those.
No, it's been a lifelong dream. So I'm a little hurt that you've been to one and I haven't been.
Well, you don't. Yeah, you don't want to. I mean, you think like, oh, sugar beets. Like some kind of beet, like, sugar is nice.
Yeah.
Sugar tastes good, and I don't have any bad association with sugar. Well, however they process it, and I've traveled by a few of these now over the years. It is the worst smell, and I don't even have a real powerful sense of smell, but it's so powerful when you're near it that until you acclimate, with me at least, I was literally dry heaving from the powerful stench. It felt like you were being poisoned. It was so toxic smelling. It's just so bad. So that is wafting in to my horrible little room, which is a room that had received some flood damage. So it just, you couldn't see the mold, but you were sure that it was there when you're staying in this little room. Again, no amenities, no modernization. And then across it was snowing. I didn't have my clothes with me. So, I didn't want to go someplace very far away to eat. There wasn't like a big taxi service kind of thing in Grand Forks. I was very poor getting into comedy.
I'm sure.
And there was only like one restaurant near. It was the, that I remember, it was a Chinese buffet across the street. And so after getting checked in and all that, I go have my first meal in this little area and I get food poisoning. And so now I'm horrifically sick in the hotel. I have a lot of bad things happening with my stomach. And I'm staying in this nasty, the floor, again, like it had like the shag-ish carpet. It was just nobody working there cared. They had zero amenities. It felt like there's probably like, mold all over in the room that you're going to get some sick. And just, it almost made me both never want to do comedy again and never want to travel again. Like, it was such a terrible experience.
All right. Well, this show has been brought to you by your favorite hotel company, right? Oh my God. That sounds absolutely, horrible and horrific. So let's end on a good note though. What's the greatest, most incredible hotel that you've ever stayed at if you're able to, break it down to one? Cause people ask me this question all the time and it's really like the Sophie's choice of, hotel experiences. I have a hard time doing it, but is there something that instantly pops to your head going, wow, I absolutely love this experience, this hotel or these people?
Yeah, the one that just pops in my head randomly was the W in Times Square.
Mm-hmm.
That hotel, like, just, to be at Times Square is such a cool cultural experience. And that hotel is so modern and just kind of sleek, looking, just very stylish. And those W mattresses, it's, you don't want to get out of them. It's like, you just want to lay there and you just want to just sleep. you just want to eat in bed. You want to get the room service. And you just want to stay in bed, just endlessly. I mean, and it really isn't like for that kind of hotel, terribly expensive. You know, it's one of those ones where you can find it for, you know, if it's like an off night, you can find it for $200 a night.
Yeah.
Right. I've stayed in like higher end ones, but that one it was my first time in New York, so it just has kind of a nostalgic appeal.
Yeah, I could tell it was your first time in New York because you were being positive about Times Square. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I think Times Square is the scourge of the city. I can't stand it. I can't stand the people. I'm walking there. Everyone stops. They think they're the only ones in the world because they have to take pictures and the selfies, and it's just it's way too stressful for me. But you know,
I'm sure.
Yeah, but you know, I'm sure if I came to your hometown, I'd be like, wow, this place is amazing. How cool is that? But you know, you know, at least you're close to Caroline's. Maybe you're performing over there. It's like a block away or something like that, right?
You know, that time I was doing it was like I don't even remember the venue. It was some little like contest I'd won. It was like the final. So I was able to bring my dad and my father-in-law at the time. So it was just a fun little trip. I truly don't even remember like what venue we ended up doing a show at. I just remember thinking like it was the first time I'd stayed in like a nicer hotel. Like I grew up in a little town in Idaho where, you know, kind of, you know, pretty poor family. And so for me, that was like, oh, cool. I want more of this. And I've stayed in a number of hotels like W's around the world and kind of stuff since. And I wish like the nicest one I've ever stayed in, just for what I like, I wish I could remember the name, but it was actually in South Africa. It was in Johannesburg, South Africa. And it was so nice. It was like you were in your own little suite, and this hotel was like part of a casino. So it had a huge casino, had a huge kind of food court of like actual nicer kind of little restaurants, and then it had, you know, the even more upscale bars and stuff within it. It was like a big complex.
Was it? It wasn't Sun City, was it?
Oh my gosh, I think it was Sun City.
I just remember I just remember during the apartheid days, I Ain't Gonna Stay in Sun City, that song. So that's the thing that makes me think of that. That's cool. That hotel.
I think that was it.
Believe it or not.
Wait. Yeah.
It was.
I think that was it.
Well, the Kirsners.
So random when
yeah, the people who owned that hotel went on and they built the Atlantis in the Bahamas.
Oh, cool! I haven't been to that one, but actually, I have heard of that one.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's pretty cool, especially if you like paying $7 for a slice of pizza. It's super awesome. But they actually have the coolest water park out there. So if you ever have a chance to go down to Nassau, take the kids, they're gonna freaking love it. My kids absolutely love the Atlantis water park. It's so super cool.
Cool. I hope. Definitely. I hope to get there one day. Then that's awesome.
All right. So, anything else you want to add before I start letting you do some shameless plugs here, Dan?
No. I think I would thanks for having me on. I actually it's nice to talk to a fellow traveler and somebody who understands this life. And I had a lot of fun, man. You know, it's funny. Some people are like, man, how do you do this? But I actually really like traveling. You know, even after all these, you know, the years I've been doing it and traveling so much for work.
Yep.
I still look forward to. I mean, it keeps getting better and better. Airports keep getting nicer. Hotels keep getting nicer. Restaurants keep getting nicer. I like it.
Yeah, it sure does. I don't know if you're like me, but for me, every time I get back from a road trip, I'm like, I never want to travel again. And then going, you know, if I'm home, like, for a few weeks and I'm going to the airport is such torture and I don't want to do it. But then as soon as I get to the hotel, I'm like, there's nothing I would rather be doing with my life than this.
You got it all to yourself. Yep. It is nice. You get that. It's Glenn time.
Yeah, but to be fair, I only feel that way after I get upgraded on a Delta flight. If I'm stuck in the back in the middle, maybe not so much. You know. I know.
I'm heading to Dayton this weekend, and I've already got upgrades on all my flights there and back, first class. So it's like, you know, that does make it a little sweeter when you're like, you know, you're going to get the good seats.
It sure does. It sure does. All right, Dan. So, tell us a little bit about how people could find you, how they could connect with you, how they could come and support you at one of your shows.
Yeah, you know what? Timesuckpodcast.com is just the best way to link into the podcast, and you can listen to it on all the various, you know, podcast players from Spotify to Google Play to all the third-party apps, Apple, all that. And then just dancummins.tv is everything stand-up related. And I'm on social media. If you just Google Dan Cummins or you Google, Timesuck, you can find all the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, and find out where I'm going to be and my calendar. And yeah, I'm going to be all over the place this fall. So come to a show.
Excellent. I love it. And that's Dan Cummins, Cummins. And the latest episode of Timesuck, as we're recording this, is Spartacus, when gladiators attack Rome itself. I can't wait to hear that one. I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to yet, but this afternoon I'm going to go out for a spiritual walkabout in my neighborhood here, and I'm going to be listening to your podcast. So I'm looking forward to that. And I want to thank all of you guys for listening, for Dan Cummins being here. And hey, listen, I'll be back next week unless I decide to give this all up and go stay in some, crappy third world type hotels and do stand-up comedy. All right. See you guys next week.
Thanks so much for listening to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman, online at rouse.media, on Twitter at Traveling Glenn, and on Facebook.com/Glenn.Hausman. We'll catch you next time.